The last thing King Ronan tasted was the metallic tang of betrayal, sharp and foul beneath the sweet richness of the elderberry wine. One moment, he was raising his goblet in a toast to the prosperity of Silverwood Kingdom, his heart swelling with pride for his people. The great hall of Silverwood Keep was a blaze of light and laughter, the banners of noble houses hanging proudly between towering stone pillars. The harvest had been bountiful, peace treaties with the neighboring forest folk were holding, and the kingdom was entering what he had hoped would be a golden age. The faces around him were those he trusted, his council of five, the architects of this prosperity. The next, a searing, twisting agony clenched his stomach, forcing the air from his lungs in a choked gasp. The grand feast blurred into a nightmarish tableau of swirling colors and distorted, silent screams. His vision tunneled, focusing not on the panicked shouts of the courtiers, but on the five figures seated at the high table with him. Their faces were not masks of shock or fear, but of calm, resolute finality. Lord Valerius, his master of war and right hand for a decade, met his dying gaze with an icy stillness, his jaw set. Chancellor Thuron, the spymaster who knew every secret in the kingdom, watched with the detached curiosity of a scholar observing an experiment, his fingers steepled. Lady Moira, treasurer of the realm, averted her eyes to tapestry on the wall, but her hands resting on the table were steady. Bishop Halbrand, the moral compass of the court, had his lips moving in what might have been a prayer for the dying, but his eyes were hard as flint. General Corbin, his top military commander, a man who had fought beside Ronan's father, gave a barely perceptible nod, as if confirming a job well done. The world dissolved into a silent, crushing darkness. Ronan expected an afterlife, a journey to the realms beyond where his parents awaited. Instead, he felt a violent wrenching, a tethering as if his very soul had been snagged on a hook of pure, unresolved fury. He did not ascend, he was anchored. When his awareness returned, it was to the cold, unyielding stone of his own castle. He was a consciousness without a body, a scream with no voice, a prisoner of the place he had loved most. He was forced to watch from the shadows as the traitors he had called his council enacted their grim farce. He saw Valerius, his face a masterpiece of feigned grief and fury, hold the poisoned goblet aloft. The forest folk, Valerius's voice boomed through the hall, now silent but for his pronouncement. They're ambassadors. They have poisoned our beloved king. This cowardly act is a declaration of war. A roar of outrage went up from the nobles who had been loyal to Ronan. The lie was sown in fertile soil, and Ronan, the ghost, could do nothing but watch it take root, his silent screams echoing in the void of his being. His reign, built on a foundation of compassion and progress, was dismantled brick by brick in the days and weeks that followed. The five regents ruled in his name, a council of regency that was nothing but a cabal of usurpers. Ronan watched, his spectral form trembling with a rage that had no outlet, as General Corbin led the royal army not in defense, but in a brutal, genocidal campaign against the peaceful forest folk. Villages that had once traded freely with Silverwood, that had shared their herbal knowledge and sung songs of fellowship, were put to the torch. The songs of the forest were replaced by the screams of the dying and the triumphant clang of Silverwood steel. The kingdom's treasury, which Ronan had diligently filled and wisely managed, was bled dry. Lady Moira, under the guise of war funding, diverted rivers of gold into her family's coffers and those of her allies. She sold royal monopolies on grain and timber to her cousins, inflating prices and plunging the common people into poverty while she dined on porcelain plates. Bishop Halbrand used the conflict to tighten his religious grip on the kingdom. He declared the forest folk's ancient nature worship to be a heresy against the divine light, and used the royal guard to silence any dissenting voices, be they priest or peasant, who questioned the official narrative of Ronan's death. He painted Ronan as a martyr slain by pagans, a narrative that made the king's ghost weep silent, bitter tears. And through it all, Chancellor Thuron's network of spies ensured no counter-narrative could survive. Whispers of doubt were extinguished, often permanently. The kingdom descended into a state of fearful conformity, a grim parody of the vibrant, hopeful land it had been. Ronan's grief was a bottomless well, but from its depths a cold, sharp purpose began to form. This was not grief, it was fury. This was not sorrow, it was a vow. He was not merely a ghost. He was a king wronged, and his throne had been stolen. His kingdom was being defiled, and he would have his reckoning. He would make them see him. He would make them feel his presence in every chilling draught, in every flickering shadow, in the very marrow of their bones. At first, his presence was only a feeling, a sudden, inexplicable chill in a sunlit corridor, a faint, indistinguishable whisper on the edge of hearing that made a servant pause and look around. But as his will solidified, so did his influence over the physical world. He learned that his emotion was the key. A surge of anger could make a candle flame, gutter, and die. A pulse of hatred could drop the temperature in a room until the breath of its occupants plumed in the air. He began a practice, focusing his immense, pent-up wrath into a fine, precise point. His first true, targeted act was against Chancellor Thuron. The spymaster was in the royal library late at night, studying reports by the light of a single oil lamp, his back to the vast, dark room. Ronan drifted behind him, a coalescence of cold and malice. He poured all his contempt, all his betrayal into a single, silent word projected directly into the man's mind. It was not a sound, but the idea of the word sharp as a needle. Traitor! Thuron flinched as if struck. His head snapped up, his eyes, usually so calm and calculating, darting around the empty rows of bookshelves. He saw nothing, but the word echoed in the silent chambers of his skull, cold and clear and accusing. He rubbed his temples, dismissing it as fatigue, the product of a long and stressful day consolidating power. But a seed of unease was planted, a tiny crack in his armor of intellectual superiority. For Bishop Halbrand, Ronan crafted a more blasphemous and personal torment. The bishop was a man whose power and sanity were built on the unshakable certainty of his faith. So Ronan attacked that certainty. During a somber mass for the martyred king, attended by all the regents, the holy water in the font at the cathedral's entrance froze solid. Despite the warmth of the hundreds of bodies and the glowing braziers, congregants gasped, crossing themselves in fear. Halbrand, leading the service, faltered in his liturgy, his face paling. Another time, the stone effigy of Saint Aelred, the patron saint of lost causes, in the crypt below seemed to weep tears not of water, but of a dark, viscous fluid that stained the marble floor below. The bishop ordered the crypt sealed, but the story spread. Halbrand would spend hours afterwards praying fervently in his private chapel, his hands trembling as he clutched his rosary, his faith shaken to its core by these unholy miracles that mocked the divine order. Lady Mora, whose heart was ruled by greed and whose sense of security was tied to her wealth, found her treasures turning against her. She would enter her private counting house, a room lined with ledgers and strongboxes, to find the stacks of gold coins not warm and inviting, but icy to the touch, leaving a grimy, soot-like residue on her perfectly manicured fingers. Her account ledgers, detailing her complex web of embezzlement, would be found open to the most damning pages, despite her having locked them away in a hidden compartment. She began to distrust her own servants, her own guards, convinced one of them was playing a cruel, knowing game. The fear began to wear on her, etching new lines of paranoia around her eyes. She took to counting her gold not with satisfaction, but with a frantic, obsessive energy, as if it might vanish at any moment. General Corbin, a man of brute force and simple pleasures, was haunted by the echoes of his own brutality. In the silence of the night, in his chambers deep within the keep, he would jerk awake from a dead sleep to the sound of phantom children screaming, the ghostly clash of steel, and the desperate, guttural war cries of the forest folk warriors he had slaughtered. He took to drinking heavily, his once boisterous confidence replaced by a jumpy vigilance. He was always armed, always looking over his shoulder, seeing the accusing eyes of the dead in every shadowed corner. The other regents noticed the change in him, the hollowed-out look, the trembling in his sword hand, and they dismissed him as a drunkard, their contempt only feeding his isolation and fear. But Ronan's most brilliant and cruelest strategy was yet to come. He realized that their greatest strength, their shared secret, was also their greatest weakness. Their alliance was one of convenience and greed, not loyalty. It was fragile, and he possessed the perfect tool to shatter it, the insidious power of suggestion. He would turn them against each other, making their own suspicion his primary weapon. He began to weave a web of paranoia, designed to make them see conspiracies in every glance and betrayal in every whisper. He focused first on Chancellor Thuron, the spider at the center of the web of information. Ronan visited him in his sleep, planting a vivid, terrifyingly real dream. In the dream, Thuron stood hidden behind a heavy tapestry in the west wing, overhearing Lord Valerius confess to another shadowy figure. "Once the war is consolidated and the treasury is fully in our control, the others are expendable," Dream Valerius said, his voice low and confident. "Thuron first. He knows too many secrets, he's a liability. Then Mora, the greedy fool. Corbin is already a broken man, and Halbrand is lost to his superstitions. The throne will be mine alone." Thuron awoke in a cold sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs. The dream felt more real than the waking world. The cadence of Valerius's voice, the specific phrasing, it was perfect. From that moment on, he watched Valerius with new, suspicious eyes, analyzing every order, every comment for hidden meaning. Ronan, in turn, whispered to Valerius. He would manifest as a sudden, bone-deep chill that settled over the Lord Protector whenever he felt most secure, sitting in Ronan's old chair or reviewing troop movements. In that wave of unnatural cold, Ronan would implant the idea that Thuron was conspiring against him, that the spymaster was gathering evidence of Valerius's war crimes and embezzlement to betray them all, and make a deal with a rival noble house to secure his own power. The regent's meetings, once a display of unified, ruthless control, became tense, hostile affairs. They were held in the same chamber where Ronan had died, and his presence was a palpable weight in the air. "The campaign in the northern wood is stalled," Corbin grumbled one day, slamming a meaty fist on the polished table, making the wine goblets jump. "Their guerrilla tactics are costing us men. We need more funds for mercenaries from the southern plains." "The funds have been allocated," Lady Mora snapped, her eyes flicking nervously from Corbin to Valerius. "Perhaps the general is misappropriating them, or his tactics are simply too costly." "I answer to Lord Valerius on military matters," Corbin retorted, his voice a low growl, "not to you, my lady. My men fight and die while you count your coins." "We all answer to the stability of the realm," Thuron interjected smoothly, his gaze lingering on Valerius, cold and analytical. "A stability that seems to be fraying at the edges. There are whispers growing louder in the city, whispers of a ghost. They say the king walks the halls at night, unable to rest." Bishop Halbrand, his face pale and drawn, moaned and clutched the holy symbol around his neck. "It is a judgment, a divine punishment for our sins. We must repent, we must confess our—" He trailed off, realizing what he was about to say. "Control yourself, Bishop," Valerius barked, but his own eyes were shadowed. He had felt the chill, heard the whispers in his own mind. He saw the calculating suspicion in Thuron's eyes, the skittish fear in Moira's, the fanatical instability in Halbrand, and the drunken incompetence in Corbin. The perfect, well-oiled machine of their conspiracy was grinding itself to pieces, and Ronan, the ghost in the gears, watched it all with cold satisfaction. He was the silent conductor of their symphony of self-destruction. But he knew that to truly reclaim his kingdom's future, to break the cycle of tyranny they had instituted, he needed a living hand to deliver the final blow. His vengeance was personal, but justice needed to be public. His gaze fell upon Alara, a young woman in her mid-20s who worked as a junior scribe and archivist in the royal library. She was quiet, observant, and fiercely intelligent. She had been a quiet admirer of his reign, often seeking out his proclamations and edicts on land rights and education to copy, her heart lifting at their wisdom and compassion. She had never believed the official story, finding the idea that the peaceful forest folk would commit such a brazen, pointless act utterly illogical. Ronan called to her. He chose her because she had eyes that saw what others missed and a mind that trusted its own logic. At first, it was subtle. A scroll about King Ronan's historic peace treaty with the forest folk, a document that was supposed to have been archived away, would fall from a shelf directly at her feet. The flame of her single reading candle would dance and sway violently when she muttered his name in frustration over the official, sanitized histories of his martyrdom she was now forced to copy. She was a logical, grounded person, but the occurrences were too persistent, too pointed to ignore. One evening as she worked late, the only soul in the vast, echoing library, a sudden, profound cold filled the space, a cold that seeped into the stone and made the parchment stiff. Her breath plumed thickly before her face. On the dusty surface of her writing desk, a faint, frosty line began to form, as if an invisible, icy finger were tracing a path through the grime. It pointed away from her desk, towards a forgotten section of the library that housed old royal genealogies and architectural plans of the keep itself. Heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, Alara rose and followed. The cold spot moved with her, a pocket of winter leading her on. It guided her to a seemingly solid section of wall behind a heavy, moth-eaten tapestry depicting the first king of Silverwood founding the keep. The frost gathered there, outlining a hidden vertical seam in the stone that was nearly invisible to the naked eye. With trembling hands, Alara pressed against the stone. For a moment nothing happened. Then, with a soft, grinding click that was deafening in the silence, a section of the wall, no wider than her shoulders, gave way, swinging inward to reveal a small, dark compartment. It was not a large space, not meant for treasure but for secrets. Inside was not gold or jewels, but a simple, unadorned, leather-bound journal. She pulled it out, her fingers numb. The cover was blank. She opened it to the first page, and her blood ran cold. It was Chancellor Thuron's private journal. The handwriting was his, unmistakably elegant and precise. As she read by the light of her flickering candle, the full, horrifying truth unfolded before her. It was all there. The initial discontent with Ronan's naive and unprofitable policies, the secret meetings in the dead of night, the plot to use a rare, untraceable poison sourced from the southern islands, the careful selection of the celebratory feast as the venue, the decision to frame the forest folk to provide a casus belli. It detailed the dosage, the expected effects, and their chillingly calm agreement to proceed. It was a confession, a meticulous record of their treason, written in the spymaster's own hand, likely for his own protection or perhaps as a record of his greatest triumph. Alara knew what she had to do. She could not go to the royal guard, who were now loyal to the regents and commanded by their cronies. She had to go to the people, to the source of the kingdom's true strength. She worked through the night, her hand cramping as she made copies of the most damning pages, the pages detailing the poisoning, the framing of the forest folk, and the division of power afterwards. As dawn broke, she slipped out of the keep and, with the help of a few trusted friends, a brewer whose business was strangled by Moira's taxes, a carpenter whose son had died in Corbin's war, she spread the copied pages through the taverns, the market squares, the docks, and the artisan districts. The truth, so long suppressed and twisted, exploded through the kingdom like wildfire. The people, already burdened by war taxes, terrified by the religious purges, and grieving sons and husbands lost in a pointless war, found their voice. The whispers that Thuron's network had struggled to contain became shouts. The shouts became a roar of righteous anger. The city guard, many of whom were commoners themselves and who had seen the kingdom's decline firsthand, began to waver. When a crowd of thousands, armed with little more than tools and fury, gathered at the gates of Silverwood Keep, the guards looked at the people, looked at the damning pages being read aloud, and they lowered their pikes. They opened the gates. The final act played out in the throne room, the very place where Ronan had been murdered. The 5 regents were there, having been summoned by a panicked servant, trying to formulate a desperate plan to suppress the uprising. But their alliance was shattered, their nerves frayed to breaking point by months of psychological torment. They stood in a tense circle before the empty throne, their voices rising in a cacophony of accusation and fear. "This is your doing, Thuron," Valerius roared, his face a mask of fury, his hand gripping the pommel of his sword so tightly his knuckles were white. Your carelessness. That journal was to be destroyed after the plan was executed. You think I would be so foolish as to leave such a thing lying about? Thuron shot back, his own dagger half-drawn. His cool composure was gone, replaced by a frantic energy. It was you who have grown too ambitious, who look at this throne with a hunger that cannot be sated. You who wanted us all out of the way. The gold is gone, the people are at the gates. Mora wailed, clutching a velvet pouch of jewels she had snatched from her chambers. We are doomed. We should have taken the treasury and fled weeks ago. It is the ghost, the king's ghost, Halbrand shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at an empty space near the high table. His robes were disheveled, his eyes wild. He is here. Can you not feel his cold judgment? He has orchestrated this. We are being punished for our sacrilege. General Corbin, his mind broken by drink, guilt, and phantom screams, saw his fellow conspirators not as allies, but as the enemies who had led him to this disgrace, who had turned him from a respected general into a butcher and a drunkard. With a wordless, guttural bellow of pure rage, he drew his greatsword and charged at Valerius. The throne room descended into a chaotic, bloody melee. Corbin's heavy blade, swung with the strength of madness, took Valerius in the shoulder before the Lord could fully bring his own, lighter weapon to bear. Valerius cried out, stumbling back. Thuron, seeing his chance to eliminate the man he now believed was his greatest threat, lunged at Corbin, sinking his thin, sharp dagger deep into the general's side. Moira tried to flee towards a side entrance, her pouch of jewels scattering across the floor, but a guardsman, now loyal to the truth, blocked her path, his face grim. Halbrand, in his final descent into madness, climbed onto the dais of the throne itself, screaming prayers of exorcism and pleas for forgiveness to the cold, unfeeling stone. Ronan watched it all, his spectral form hovering near the high, vaulted ceiling. He felt no joy, no savage pleasure. Only a grim, cold satisfaction. He saw Thuron fall, gutted by Corbin before the general himself collapsed, bleeding out onto the polished marble floor, his greatsword clattering from his hand. He saw Valerius, bleeding profusely from his grievous wound, crawl on his hands and knees towards the throne, a final, desperate act of ambition, only to have a guardsman's spear point pressed to his chest, stopping him mere feet from his goal. He saw Mora captured, sobbing hysterically as she was dragged away, her ill-gotten wealth glittering mockingly around her. He saw Halbrand, his prayers turning to incoherent sobs, until he finally fell silent, curling into a fetal position at the foot of the throne he had helped defile, lost to the world. They had destroyed each other. The poison of their betrayal had finally consumed them. His revenge was complete. As the last of the usurpers was subdued, a profound, heavy silence fell over the hall. The fighting was over. The cold, sharp fury that had anchored Ronan to the world of the living for so long, that had been the very core of his being since his death, began to dissipate. It felt like a chain, long wrapped tightly around his soul, was finally loosening, link by link. He felt a warmth, a gentle, pulling light, a release he had been denied. He looked down one last time at Alara, who had entered the room, holding the original journal aloft like a standard. She stood amidst the people, the baker, the blacksmith, the farmer, the soldier, her face smudged with dirt but radiant with a fierce, triumphant hope. He saw the fear and confusion on the faces of the people slowly being replaced by a dawning, cautious relief. The chains of his vengeance fell away. The ghost of King Ronan faded, not with a scream of triumph, but with a long, silent sigh of peace, his form dissolving into the morning light now streaming through the high windows, becoming one with the dust motes dancing in the air. In the days that followed, a new council was formed, led by those who had remained loyal to the kingdom's true ideals and by new voices risen from the people. Alara was a central voice on this council, her quiet intelligence and unwavering courage ensuring the true story was told and that the path forward was one of reconciliation, not further vengeance. The war with the forest folk was ended, and a long, difficult process of healing and reparations began. Silverwood Keep was no longer a place of ghosts and fear, but a symbol of resilience, a testament to the fact that even the deepest darkness could not extinguish the light of truth forever. and in the legends and songs of the people, the tale was told of the Ghost King, the just and compassionate ruler who, even in death, would not rest until his kingdom was free. His name was cleared, and his betrayers had met their end, not by his hand, but by the poisonous fruit of their own treachery. His was a cursed legacy, born from a vile act of betrayal, but from that curse a stronger, more enduring justice was finally born. The memory of the king who loved his people enough to haunt their oppressors became a foundational stone of the new Silverwood, a reminder that justice, like a seed in winter, could sometimes only bloom after a long and bitter season.